Chris, in case you're interested, let's see if
Yeah, show me.
There's the
Awesome.
audience. Magic of technology.
Hey, everybody.
Okay, so here we all are. Chris Diaz is joining us from, where are you right now? Are you in New York?
Brooklyn, New York.
Brooklyn, what? So, I think what we want to do is give the audience a chance to ask as many questions as they want or engage in whatever conversation is prompted by seeing this. But I want to sort of start off with a little bit of a conversation between you and me. And we're going to do this. This whole event is going to be about 30 minutes, 35 minutes. So maybe the first thing, Chris, is I would love for you to talk a little bit about not necessarily how you came to theater, since you and I covered that in the interview that's in the program, and not even necessarily sort of where wrestling sits for you, but in terms of writing this play, I mean, yes, it's a wrestling play, but it also has so much more underneath it. The wrestling is a medium, right? It's not it's not really the subject of the play. Can you talk a little bit about why, for you, that was an important match to make?
Sure. At first, I'm just going to say I'm sitting here in bed because my son is in the other room. I'm in a small Brooklyn apartment, so I've only got one room. So that's why I look like I'm in bed, because I am. And now I completely forgot the question. Why was this a match? I don't know. I mean, I really, I think I came into this wanting to sort of write something about wrestling, because I really grew up on it, and I really know too much about it, and I needed to figure out a way to sort of use all the time that I wasted in my youth, use it constructively. And so it started out from that perspective, but I think the big thing for me was realizing that these aren't just superheroes or cartoon characters. These are real people. These are real men and women who do this for a living. And do it for more than for a living. Do it for their life. This is their art. This is who they are. And when you start to think of it that way, when you start to think of things as a business, you understand that they're not always everything that they're cracked up to be. So as much as we loved watching Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage and whoever in our youth, we realize as we get older that they were actual people, and there was a lot of complicated stuff that goes into it. And so that helped me also think about the way that you look at theater, or the way that you look at politics, the way you look at anything that people do for a living. You sort of have to understand that it's people underneath, at base.
When you and I were talking, and some of this is included in the program notes, but one of the things that you talked about in terms of a source point for this play, and I think probably for a lot of your work, is giving actors a chance to speak long thoughts who maybe don't always get a chance to speak long thoughts. Can you talk about sort of where your relationship is to that idea?
I spent time here in New York City, and I sort of learned a lot about theater from the public theater here in New York, the New York Shakespeare Festival, and Joe Papp. I wasn't around for Joe Papp, but in the 70s, the big thing that he did was really give voices to people of all races and colors and genders and shapes and sexual preferences and all that good stuff. And you find things like the New York Shakespeare Festival, Shakespeare in the Park, where you would have people like Raul Julia, or I wish I could think of who, but folks, Puerto Rican folks or African American folks. I think Denzel did stuff there. And you get to do Shakespeare, and you get to do complicated roles that you wouldn't always be, and you get to do leads. It's not just a matter of playing Othello. It's a matter of getting to play Hamlet, or getting to play Romeo, Juliet. So, I think I come out of that tradition, and I know a lot of actors. I know a lot of Latino actors, a lot of actors of different backgrounds, and a lot of the times you end up having to play either like a small role in a Shakespeare play, or, as we see a lot, you play a maid in a TV show if you're a Latina. And so, I wasn't down with that. And I know these actors are really great, and, the idea of being able to give an actor, the opportunity to say something like 14,000 words in 2 hours, which I think is what May says. For an actor, and you guys have a great actor there who's never, probably doesn't get the opportunity to do stuff like this and to show everything that he can do. And so you just want to give folks, those same opportunities that I've been given.
Yes. a little bit about, so we know sort of like where the art comes from for you in terms of sort of some inspiration, but can you talk about your aesthetic a little bit? Like, what is a Chris Diaz play?
So I come out of 3 or 4 different things. When I started, I mean, I'm trained at NYU, so I learned like a very linear storytelling approach. But I try to bury that underneath everything else. I learned a lot from the hip-hop theater world. So folks like Universes or Danny Hock, even John Leguizamo, you know, a lot of these folks who were doing either solo performance or poetic performance, not just traditional folks sitting down talking to each other. I also come out of like the 1980s, like late 80s, early 90s playwriting world. So it's like Tony Kushner, Angels in America, but stuff like M. Butterfly, Zoot Suit, which is just like one of the best plays that anybody, like the most important play I think I've ever read. John Guare, 6 Degrees of Separation. These plays that played a lot with theatricality. It wasn't, again, just people sitting down and talking to each other, but you didn't really have blackouts, and you moved quickly, and you used the audience, and you used any kind of storytelling technique you could find. So I think those were sort of the main things. And then I actually, when I started watching theater, I watched musicals before anything else. And we talked about Chad Deity a lot as a musical, except in musicals, when the emotion gets to be too much to convey through words, you convey it through singing. And in Chad Deity, when it gets to be too much to convey through words, we just fight.
Speaking of musicals, I wanted to give you a chance to say a little something about your current project that just got announced. Can you tell us what it is and sort of what that's about?
Yeah, it's cool. I'm working on like a bunch of projects that I'm not really allowed to discuss, and it's hard for me to be in that position because I'm on like Twitter constantly. You know, Alana knows. I'm on Twitter constantly, and I want to talk about things all the time. But I'm working. I got invited to come in and help out with a musical that's being produced at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival next spring. It's called The Unfortunates, and it's a really cool project. These 4 young guys who are musicians, blues musicians, hip-hop artists, all sort of combined. They wrote this incredible show sort of about the power of these great blues songs and the power of community, and they needed somebody to come in and help them sort of structure it into a show, and we're doing that right now, and you know, we got a few more months working on that, and it's a blessing to go in and something that somebody else has already started, and just sort of help them clean it up and shape it up.
And maybe one more question from me before we turn to the audience. My big question for you is, so Chad Deity is a play that should not get produced. Like it's impossible, right? Like you know what I mean? Like I mean, I think it should get produced. Obviously, we're producing it. But in terms of the requirements of it, in terms of what it asks of not just the actors, but of sort of the planning around it, the casting, all this stuff. It's one of those wonderfully impossible plays that I think sometimes a lot of young writers get told not to write impossible plays, right? They get told to write producible work.
Right.
So you did not do that.
Right.
And the result was that this play has been produced now, is this the 6th production? 6th
or 7th, yeah, and there's 5 or 6 coming in the next like 2 months.
Right. So let's see, and it premiered a year?
In 2009, and so it's gone Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, Minneapolis, Los Angeles, Louisville, Boca Raton, you guys, and then it'll go Berkeley, Dallas, DC, Denver, Charleston, South Carolina, and Sacramento.
Okay, so what I want to know from you is, what do you make of this? This fact, you know what I mean? Like, what does this say?
Yeah, so the first play I ever wrote was a sort of impossible hip-hop theater play. It had DJs on stage, and it had b-boying, and had graffiti. That actually was the hardest part. We did graffiti on stage and then had to remove it from the stage. Actually sort of impossible. We had to cook an egg on stage in 1 minute, and that's the hardest thing that we've ever tried to do, is actually cook an egg on stage in 1 minute. So that was sort of impossible, and folks really, really liked that play but couldn't produce it. It took 7 years for it to get produced anywhere, and I was so bummed out by that, and I was like, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write plays with 3 characters who just talk to each other and nothing else happens. And and it was fine. It's a fine play. I like it a lot, actually. It's a good play, I think. It still hasn't been produced. I like it a lot, but it's not. There are other people who do that really well. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, August Osage County. Those are plays I don't think I can write. I wish I could, because they're kind of brilliant and beautiful, and they're the best example of the best example of that kind of play you're talking about, of like small, semi-producible. August Osage County has 4,000 people in it, but like, these plays are small and producible. I just never was able to really do that, and I wouldn't be expressing the stuff that I need to express. So I think like I had a playwright come in. I think Doug Wright came into one of my classes, and he said everything you write should be as urgent as a suicide note. And I felt like I couldn't write a play that was as urgent as a suicide note if it was just simple and small and producible. To me, they have to be big, they have to involve the audience, and they have to do something a little bit more complex than you could on a television screen.
Great. So I'd like to maybe take this opportunity to get some questions from the audience. Does anybody have anything they want to ask Chris? Be bold. Yeah, please. I'm going to repeat the question so Chris can hear it. So go ahead.
Okay. I want to know if Jesse Ventura, his political ambitions, had any influence on the writing of this play.
Okay. The question is whether Jesse Ventura's political ambitions had any influence on you in the writing of the play.
People ask that a lot. I wouldn't say exactly. I mean, Jesse Ventura, for those who don't know, because at this point it was a long time ago, when he was in wrestling, he was huge. He was a bad guy. He was a color commentator. And he's brilliant. I mean, he at that time was a particularly brilliant dude who was really good at making you believe the bad guy perspective of things. And so I think that was actually really fundamental. It was right around the same time. I may have started writing this a couple of years after he was governor, and I think it was sort of parallel. So it was floating around in the background. And certainly the idea of that larger-than-lifeness translating into the political arena in some way probably played some sort of small role in the back of my head.
Great question. Other questions? Yeah, please, down here in the front.
Yeah. Chad and the chairman, the manager, wasn't Chad David O'Toole from regular wrestling, and the Everett K also, wasn't he like John Hernandez?
Good question. So we have a young man in the front row who's asking about sort of the real world analogs to some of these characters, citing EKO and John Laurinaitis. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the points of inspiration?
Absolutely. That sounds like a real wrestling fan right there. I like it. So the basics are Chad Diety is based on The Rock and Hulk Hogan a little bit. EKO is definitely based on Vince McMahon in particular, but I think John Laurinaitis is the best example of what we've seen him lately. Very much like EKO. And who else? Who else is in this play? Mace is very similar to, I don't know if you guys know Chavo Guerrero. I'll tell a quick story. We did the show in LA, and Chavo actually came to see it in LA. And I went up to him at the beginning before the show started, and he had heard that it was similar to his story. And so I went up to him and I was like, listen, it's a pleasure to meet you. I don't want you to think that I'm trying to write your story. He was like, I know. And then I went over at intermission, and his wife turned to me and grabbed me. She was like, what do you mean you're not writing his story? This is exactly like him. And it was one of the best compliments ever. I mean, he gave me a big hug at the end of it, and he was like, thank you, So anyway, so Chavo, and I think those are basically some of the analogs, some of the connections to the real folks.
Great. Other questions? Yeah.
So where does VP come from?
So the lovely young man who plays our Mace would like to know where VP comes from.
Yeah. What? Say it again.
Where does VP come from?
VP. There was a storyline. It's mentioned in the play briefly. Is Muhammad Hassan storyline, and I wouldn't say that VP the character is based on him, but the idea of being portrayed as a terrorist, somebody being portrayed as a terrorist, as an evil bad guy, is definitely based on that. There's a wrestler right now who's actually going to come in the show in DC. He's going to come out and do sort of a talk back afterwards. named Sanjay Dutt, and he wrestles for TNA right now, the second, not the WWE, sort of the second biggest company. And some of these guys, Tommaso Ciampa, who was there, I think has wrestled him. Some of these guys, will certainly know him. So anyway, I've been told by 3 or 4 different folks in the wrestling business, they were like, you wrote a play about Sanjay, this is him, this is him. So that's, I think, sort of one of the big connections there.
I mean, not for nothing though, VP also with his deep Brooklyn roots feels a little like you in some ways.
Yeah, I'm more based. I'm definitely based. The story at the beginning of the show is almost exactly based on my life. I've never been nearly as cool as VP. There's actually an actor here in New York named Utkarsh, who's actually going to be in the movie Pitch Perfect, coming out real soon, who is very, very much an inspiration for it too, a personal inspiration, a friend.
Awesome. Other questions? Yeah, another one from the young man in the front.
I never heard about, he never said something about the bad guy, Billy Heartland and Billy Corey.
Oh, you want Chris to talk about Billy Heartland and the bad guy? Great. So.
Yeah, that's great. So the bad guy is all sort of there's always just the guy who doesn't get much information about him, and he's just sort of there to lose. And so there's a lot of unspecific inspirations for him. Billy Heartland, who's Billy Heartland like? Right now, I guess he's sort of like a nicer Heath Slater, maybe right now. Heath Slater's kind of a goofball. And then Old Glory, there used to be a wrestler named the Patriot, who's he had the American flag mask and the whole deal. Yeah, I think that's probably who it is.
Do you have a question?
No, I'm just a little hurt by Heath Slater.
Oh. Mike, who plays our bad guy and etc., is a little hurt by your Heath Slater.
I can't think of anybody. He's the nicer, cooler Heath Slater.
Other questions? Yeah, Sean.
So I have a question about casting.
Yes.
First of all, hey Chris.
So Sean is going to ask you a question about casting, and I'll repeat it for you.
Okay, great.
There's a large conversation right now nationally that I think rises every so often about the value of ethnically specific casting as playwrights call for it. And it took us a year to cast this play. And I had a handful of Latino guys come out who were gunning for the VP role, who were really good and understood the whole element of hip hop and really had great stage presence and great physical body types, right? But we really stuck to our guns to find somebody who we felt was right in more ways than that. And I'm curious what you think about that, because that's part of what makes this very difficult to produce, specifically for a small company.
Yeah. Did you hear that? You want me to repeat it?
I heard that bit. So hopefully I got enough.
Okay.
It's a big part of it. I mean, I've auditioned a bunch of folks for this show, and especially for VP and Chad. The hardest thing is that you can't get somebody who's acting at having presence. You can't get somebody who's acting at trying to be cool. There's no way around it. You know either you are that or you're not. And so I think in general, when we've cast the show, we've really wanted to make sure to cast folks who had that, even if they're a little less sort of classically trained. You can't fake it. Especially again, I sort of come out of the hip hop world, and you got to put your time in hip hop, and you have to know your stuff, and if you don't, the audience is gonna know. So I think you take that extra time, and especially even with the physicality, there's a way that a real wrestler moves around the ring, and if somebody's sort of hesitant or can't do it, it's not only bad for the performance, it's dangerous. So you got to find people who sort of can inhabit that a little bit.
And so the other part of the question that Sean asked was, with all the conversation right now nationally around the importance of being ethnically specific when you cast roles that call for that. One of the things that we experienced was having a bunch of guys, as Sean said, a bunch of Latino guys who showed up and wanted to play VP because it was a great role, right? So what is, in terms of your relationship to the roles you write and to sort of watching this all unfold nationally in sort of the theater conversation right now, do you want to talk a little bit about sort of this ethnically specific casting thing?
Yeah, so the first thing is, I know, again, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but I know that there are actors out there who can do this. I know that I know for a fact I can name off the top of my head 20 Latino actors between the ages of 28 and 38 who can handle 2 hours of 2 hours of dialogue and get power bombed at the end. Like, I know that they can do it. So that was one of the big things with this play, was to write it with no hesitation about, was it going to be cast, and then could I find the actors? And so when we go into a casting situation, I don't just make the theater do it. I try to play as much role as possible. Although you guys found everybody out there, which is amazing to me, and you did all the work. So that's the first thing, is that I know these actors exist. The other thing is that I'm going to generalize here, and I don't mean to generalize, but if you are a white actor, if you are an actor who sort of is, even I would say me to some extent if I was an actor, who can sort of play lots of different roles and not be, quote unquote, ethnically specific, you get a lot of opportunity, and you get an opportunity to hone your craft. And I think that we've got these young folks, people of color. I try to do this in all my work, not just young folks, but people of color who are great, who are really strong actors, but don't necessarily have the resume, or don't necessarily have the same opportunities to keep working. And so we just did this at an Actors Theater of Louisville, and this kid, Alex Hernandez, who came in and filled in and learned the role in 3 days, literally learned the role in 3 days to play Mace. And he packed his first powerbomb 20 minutes in rehearsal. He went up and came down for his first powerbomb. And he's a guy who, he's great. He's a good-looking guy, and he's smart, and he's a good actor. But the opportunities aren't the same for him as they are for other people. And so for him to get this shot at such a young age, to hold a show and to carry a show, is so important to me. And so, like, it's essential, that you get it right. You get the VPs right. VP is the hardest role to cast, just because it's a smaller amount of folks in the acting pool. And again, even the folks who sort of fit it just haven't had that opportunity to play that role. So, I think we're taking chances in a lot of places, bringing in young folks, new folks, and it's not as big a risk as it seems, because they're the ones who know what this is about.
Right. Yeah, Rick.
Could you tell that gentleman who learned Mace in 3 days, he's got my ultimate respect?
Rick, who plays Mace, said to tell the young man who played Mace in 3 days' notice that he has his ultimate respect.
Listen, that's the most amazing story. The second most amazing story was the Mace in Minneapolis. He was doing the whole run. We built this incredible fight sequence for the end that had him doing like a head scissor, headlock combined takeover, a bunch of like crazy stuff. And we had one preview. We had an invited dress, and then we had one preview. During the invited dress, he fell and cracked a rib. So we canceled the preview, and he went up the next day and did the entire run with a broken rib. And when we had to reblock it, he couldn't bump it all. He couldn't fall. But he did the whole thing. So he was like, I would just get to the end of the show and collapse in the dressing room and breathe for the first time. So, there's some amazing stuff. And no pressure. No pressure, Rick.
Other questions? Anything else? Last call? Great. Well, Chris, thank you so much for being with us. Magic of technology brings you here with us together. And I will see you on Twitter and, on all the other social networks. And maybe we can watch Raw together remotely.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Thanks again. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thanks, everybody.